She thought no one was watching. Every morning, she tied her hair, rolled up her sleeves, and stepped into the cold silence of the woods. One log at a time, she built her cabin alone, unnoticed, unwanted by the world, but hidden among the trees. A cowboy watched her with quiet eyes and a storm in his heart. His boots never stepped forward, but his gaze never left her. She didn't know he was a widower, carrying a past painful to speak of, longing for a future he no longer believed in. The way she moved, the strength in her silence, it stirred something in him he thought was dead. She hammered through her heartbreak, and he stood frozen in his. One built to forget, the other stood remembering. Neither knew their stories were about to collide. Neither expected the storm. But fate, like the wind, has a way of pushing hearts together. Clara had left everything behind: the noise, the memories, the pain. Deep in the wild, far from the nearest road, she found a patch of land where no one knew her name. Her hands were rough from days of lifting, cutting, and building. She didn't wait for help. She didn't ask for it. Each morning, she rose with the sun, tied her boots, and carried logs heavier than her fears. The sound of her axe echoed through the trees, her only company the whispering wind and crackling leaves. She was building more than a cabin, she was building a new life. People said women couldn't survive out there alone. She was proving them wrong. What she didn't know was that someone had noticed. Someone stood quietly on the ridge above, watching her with eyes full of sorrow and curiosity. A cowboy, a stranger, a man haunted by loss, drawn to her strength, yet too broken to speak. He had only meant to pass by. Eli wasn't looking for anyone, not anymore. The pain of losing his wife still sat heavy in his chest like a stone that refused to move. It had been 3 winters since she passed, and in all that time, he'd avoided people, avoided feelings, avoided hope. But the first time he saw Clara, something in him shifted. He had stopped on the trail, reins loose in his hand, eyes narrowed. Against the wind, she was there, in the clearing, lifting a beam onto her shoulders like it weighed nothing. Her face was fierce, focused, tired. He should have ridden away, but he didn't. The next day, he came back. From the trees, he watched her, always at a distance. She worked through cuts and bruises, through rain and wind, and never once did she falter. She was strong not just in body, but in will. It reminded him of his wife before illness stole her spirit. But Clara was different. Clara was surviving something he couldn't name. He never made a sound, never let his boots snap a twig or stir a leaf. He didn't want to scare her, didn't want to be seen. He just watched. Sometimes she would pause, rub her shoulder, look out at the sky like she was searching for a sign. Those were the moments Eli found hardest to bear. He wasn't supposed to care. He told himself he was just passing through, just curious, just restless. But every day, he found himself back at that same spot, hidden behind the pines, drawn to her strength like a moth to flame. Once, she dropped her tools and sat down on a rock, shoulders shaking ever so slightly. He couldn't hear her cry, but he saw her wipe her face with the sleeve of her shirt. His hands clenched at his sides. He wanted to help her, wanted to walk down and say something, anything, but his feet wouldn't move. The fear of breaking the fragile silence between them, even if she didn't know he was there, was too great. What would he even say? That he missed a family he no longer had. That she reminded him of a woman he lost. That watching her rebuild something from nothing gave him hope he wasn't ready to feel. No, he stayed quiet, hidden, but his visits became longer. He learned her rhythms, the way she tied her boots, the order she stacked her tools, the way she hummed without knowing. It became a ritual, like church. And while she built walls, he was silently breaking down his own. Still, he never imagined a day would come when he'd have no choice but to step out of the shadows. But fate doesn't wait for readiness, and neither does the storm that was coming. The clouds had been gathering all afternoon, heavy and low, like the sky itself was mourning. Clara noticed the wind first, sharper than usual, biting through her sleeves as she tried to hammer in the final plank. Her roof still had a long way to go, but she refused to stop. She had worked through worse, or so she told herself. But this storm wasn't like the others. The sky cracked open with thunder, loud enough to shake her bones. The trees, groaned, leaves swirled in angry circles. She should have gone inside, should have waited it out, but stubbornness had always been her shadow. She climbed up the ladder anyway, arms full of wooden shingles, lips pressed tight in defiance. One wrong step, that's all it took. The ladder wobbled, her boots slipped, her body fell sideways, crashing to the muddy ground with a scream that tore through the wind. Pain exploded in her shoulder, hot and sharp, and for the first time since she arrived, she felt fear, real, gut-deep fear, the kind that reminded her she was alone. But she wasn't, not tonight, from the trees. Boots pounded against the wet ground. A dark figure moved fast through the storm, his hat soaked, his coat flying behind him like a cloak of shadows. Clara blinked through the rain, frozen by pain and panic, unable to speak. The man dropped to his knees beside her. "Don't move," he said, voice low, steady. His hands were calloused, trembling slightly as they checked her arm. She didn't know him, but something in his eyes calmed her, something broken, something kind. Who are you?" she whispered. For a moment, he didn't answer, just looked at her like he had known her forever. "Name's Eli," he said softly. "I've been watching. I mean making sure you're safe." Clara wanted to be angry, wanted to demand answers, but the thunder drowned out her thoughts. Another crack lit up the sky, and he lifted her in his arms before she could protest. She was cold, soaked, and hurt, but somehow she felt safer than she had in years. He carried her inside the half-built cabin, set her down gently near the small fireplace, and quickly lit a flame. Warm light flickered across their faces as the storm raged outside. For minutes, they said nothing, just breathed in the silence, both stunned by what had just happened. He wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and she finally looked him full in the face. Mud streaked his cheek, rain dripped from his hair. But his eyes, they held stories, grief, and something else, hope. "Why me?" she asked. He looked down, voice barely audible. "Because you remind me of everything I lost, and everything I thought I'd never feel again." In that moment, thunder faded. Not outside, but within them. Something had cracked open between two strangers. Not broken, but begun. The whole fire crackled softly as the storm continued to beat against the walls of the half-built cabin. Clara sat wrapped in the old wool blanket Eli had given her, her injured shoulder resting against the rough wooden wall. Across from her, Eli sat with his hands stretched toward the fire, silent, still soaked, his hat placed neatly beside him. The flickering light danced between them, casting shadows that seemed to move with the weight of unspoken words. She watched him carefully, trying to read the man who had appeared from nowhere and risked everything to help her. His face was strong, but tired, his eyes carrying the kind of sadness that never truly leaves. She wanted to ask questions, demand to know why he had been watching her, but something in the softness of his presence stopped her. It wasn't fear, it was understanding. She knew what it was like to carry pain so deep it silenced the soul. So instead, she whispered, "Thank you." He nodded slowly, barely meeting her gaze. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said after a moment, his voice gentle, not judging. "I know," she replied, "but it's the only place that doesn't hurt." He looked up then, eyes locking with hers. "Me too." That was all they needed to say. The silence between them grew warmer, not heavier. They didn't need long stories or explanations, their eyes told enough. Clara saw it now. He wasn't just watching her out of curiosity. He was holding on to something she reminded him of. A life, a love, a home he'd lost. And maybe, just maybe, he saw a second chance in the way she kept building, even through the pain. He didn't speak of his wife, and she didn't speak of the past she had run from. But in that little room, with wind howling outside and warmth slowly spreading inside, their wounds began to breathe. She offered him a cup of tea she had made from dried herbs, and he took it with a quiet thank you. When their fingers touched for just a second, something shifted like a locked door cracking open. Hours passed, the storm softened into a drizzle. The fire dimmed, and still they sat there, not needing words. Eli glanced at her shoulder. "Tomorrow, I'll help you finish that roof," he said, not as a question, but as a promise. Clara gave a small nod, her lips curling into the first real smile she'd allowed in months. For the first time, she wasn't alone in the fight. He didn't fix her, and she didn't heal him. But together, they began something new. It wasn't loud or dramatic, it was quiet, slow, and real. To broken hearts, stitched together not by grand gestures, but by presence, by patience, and by the simple act of staying when it would have been easier to walk away. The days turned softer, the nights less cold. With every nail hammered and every wall raised, Clara felt her chest lighten. Not because the work was done, but because she wasn't doing it alone. Eli showed up every morning before sunrise, always with 2 cups of coffee and a quiet smile. That spoke louder than words. They shared stories slowly, in pieces, like mending broken glass. And as the cabin took shape, so did something between them, fragile but strong, like roots finding soil after a long drought. One morning, Clara carved a small wooden sign and nailed it above the door. It simply read, "Home." When Eli saw it, he stood still, his eyes filling with tears he didn't try to hide. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man passing through. He felt chosen, and she, once lost in silence, had found someone who stayed. To strangers, one storm and a place to belong.